2019, St. Vincent and the Grenadines made history by becoming the smallest country to ever win a non-permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council. What is the UN Security Council and what are its functions? What are some of the likely benefits for SVG for being on such a prestigious body? Is there a cost to be a part of the UN Security Council, and if so, is it worth the benefits that can be derived from its membership? Join our live program, The Viewpoint, on Sunday, June 16th from 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. on SVG-TV and Magic 103.7, or view our live Facebook stream and be part of the discussion by calling the hotline 458-0088 or WhatsApp 530-8962. Moderator Mr. Curtis King. Panel, lawyer Mr. Julian Jack, Mr. Philbert John, educator. The Viewpoint, sharing our thoughts, speaking our truth. Sponsors: LA Unique Upholstery, Island-wide Medical Transportation Services, Supreme Trading, General and Maritime Agency.
Good night to viewers and listeners. Welcome to another edition of The Viewpoint. Tonight we have two gentlemen with us. I now ask them to introduce themselves, starting with the brother on my right.
Yes, good night, viewers and listeners. Are you also on audio?
Yes.
Okay, good night to all. I am Philbert John, preferred to be referred to as Mr. P. John. I am an educator, currently attached to the Barley Secondary School.
Thank you very much, Brother Philbert. And the brother on my left.
Pleasant good night to you, viewers and listeners. My name is Julian Jack, and I am a barrister at law and notary public as well. And it gives me great pleasure to be here and to join this panel to discuss this evening's program.
Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen. Viewers, listeners, tonight we are focusing on the very topical issue of the elections of St. Vincent and the Grenadines to a position on the United Nations Security Council. And that position is that of a non-permanent member. Tonight we want to focus on what is the United Nations Security Council, what are the likely benefits that SVG can derive from being on the UN Security Council, as well as looking at the cost implications, if there are any, and whether or not, as some people seem to be questioning, it is justified. The two gentlemen introduced themselves, but I'm going to go a little bit further and say to you that Brother Philbert P. John is an educator of long standing, and he, I know, specializes in social studies education, and hence the topic is very much within his expertise. Brother Julian Jack himself, yes, he is a barrister at law, but he would have done studies at the international relation. Well, he did international relation as part of his studies. I think, Jack, you have a master's in international relations. So it's international law. Okay. Yeah. Wonderful.
Well, maybe if you want, I can add a few things.
Yes,
just simply to say that before becoming a barrister, I worked in the foreign ministry for several years. And I also worked with the OECS embassies in Belgium for a number of years before coming back to St. Vincent and, continuing my studies in the legal field to become a barrister.
Good, so wonderful. So we have two gentlemen who can speak to the issue. Unfortunately, we were planning to have a third member of the panel, someone representing the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Unfortunately, although we made a strenuous effort to get someone, we were not successful. So we are all males on the panel tonight, and we hope to do justice. Remember, sometime during the program, you will be able to join us. The hotline is 458-088. Those who wish to call or follow our live Facebook stream, so you can call 458-088, or you can use WhatsApp. The number is 530-8962. Okay, so we'll take our first break and we'll be back with you. Welcome back to the Viewpoint. And in this segment, we are going to be looking at the United Nations and the United Nations Security Council. And I'm going to start with you, Brother Pijan. Please tell us, since 1979, around there, 1980, after becoming an independent country, we joined the United Nations. What is this body, the United Nations?
Yes, Curtis, thank you very much. Now, the United Nations is the most significant world body. It was formed in 1945 because it basically out of the ruins of World War II. And it succeeded a previous organization called League of Nations, which was created after the end of World War I with the main purpose of ending world wars. But because that was unsuccessful in ending world wars, because there was World War II, it was defunct, and they've created the United Nations. And the organization came into effect in 1945. In fact, the 24th of October to be exact, with 50 countries. And their main aims were to address world peace and security, economic and social development across the globe, human rights, and promote international law. St. Vincent and Grenadines joined this body in 1980, as you said, just after independence. And in the United Nations structure, they have what they call 6 main organs, 5 of which are still functioning. The General Assembly, which is a gathering of all member nations. This takes place at least once a year. And at the moment, there are 193 independent sovereign states that form the part of the General Assembly. Then there is the Economic and Social Council, which deals with primarily economic and social development issues across the globe through its various entities. I don't think we are here to discuss those entities at the moment, but just to say that. Then there also is the International Court of Justice, which again sustains and promotes international law. And the one that we are talking about today is the UN Security Council, whose primary aim is to secure world peace at all levels. Then there was another entity referred to as the Trustee Council, which basically took care of states that were not necessarily independent, but that ceased to function in 1994. And so we have just the 5 organs: the Secretariat, which is basically the functionary or the executive arm that actually carries out all the mandates of the UN. You have the ECOSOC, the Economic and Social Council, the International Court of Justice, and the General Security Council. Now, the Security Council is perhaps the most powerful and most influential of all the UN bodies, in that while the other bodies make recommendations to member states, decisions from the Security Council tend to be mandatory. They must be followed, and in fact they are often enforceable. And the Security Council basically passes resolutions binding on our member countries. And to be a part of the Security Council is indeed significant in and of itself, and for a small country such as St. Vincent. And it's something we should definitely go and celebrate.
And be just. Thank you very much for giving to the discussion by looking at the broader order of the United Nations, and we are now zeroing in on one of its principles of the Security Council. Brother Julian, let us continue the discussion with regards to the Security Council. Perhaps you should start by looking at the structure of the council itself, and then let us zero in on some of the major functions. And I mean, you could remind us of any activities that they would have engaged in the past to carry out its mandate.
Sure. Thank you. Curtis, the United Nations as a world body, as indicated by Brother John, is in fact a body that was set up in, as you said, 1945, and it had a specific mandate to do so. And for particular historical reasons, of course, world wars, trying to find peace between nations rather than using force, because the issue is really about non-use of force, and the fundamental principle of sovereign equality and the sovereignty of state as paramount to the issue. Hence the reason whether it's small or large countries, they have come to be regarded as equal in that sense. And so that sets the stage for the activities of that body, so that small as well as large states are given the same sort of recognition with respect to the activities, as well as, of course, the principles of international law, which suggest that a state, once it is sovereign, that sovereignty looms large in the sense that it doesn't matter what sort of size, what sort of resources, etc. But importantly, apart from that, is the fact that there were several bodies and were set up within that framework to, of course, carry out certain mandates or specific functions. And the Security Council, as has been alluded to by Brother John, was specially set up to deal with international peace and security. Of course, and why was this so important? One has to just go back again to the genesis of the organization. The organization was set up, as you said, to maintain the peace globally, because coming out of world wars, the history of Europe was fraught with many wars, 2 world wars, but many wars before that. And the whole idea of trying to find peaceful solution to problems was, at the center of this new quest for the development of some sort of framework by which to be able to achieve that sort of peaceful, sort of harmonious atmosphere of having relations between countries. Now, when the Security Council was set up with this particular mandate to ensure that there is global security and peace, the structure itself had to be, devised in such a way that the founding member states, and I think we ought to really look at that, the 5 permanent members as they are now, were the ones which would have been in a position after the war to more or less sit at that table and sort of map out what might have been a structure to address the issue of peace and a lasting peace, so to say. So those 5 members were, and they still are today, China, the United Kingdom, the US, France, and Russia. So those 5 countries have been the founding members of the Security Council and the United Nations, and they continue to be with a particular structure in place that would guarantee that they have the degree of equal rank among themselves. And they are referred to, for that reason, as the veto state. Each of them hold a veto with respect to any decision that is made by the body. So, for example, if there is a decision with respect to any security issue that may emanate or come up in that body, the respective members hold a veto power, which means that once any of those members cast that power, that veto, in terms of voting, it would mean that that decision or whatever they may have come to by way of discussion would have no sort of effect. It would nullify it, in other words. So it was very important for that aspect of the framework to be put in place as a way of ensuring that there is that sort of, equal ranking between those 5 countries. But over the course of time as well, it is and was recognized that in addition to the 5 member states, the international body had to take on a truly international character. And so within that mechanism again is the built-in principle of the geographical representation of nations coming from different areas of the world, whether it be Africa, Asia, Europe, Latin America, Caribbean, and so on, and other countries as we have referred to. So it is with that geographical spread and that sort of principle of geographical representation that you have also, as part of the mechanism, a fundamental which now shifts from 5 permanent member states to 10 non-member states. Or totally we have 15 comprising this body. A very important and significant, of course, body, since the whole is lasting peace in the world, by which nations can, of course, exercise those rights to sovereignty and their own political, determination and so on. And of course, without peace, you can't have that. So it is critical and fundamental, as a matter of fact, to the whole system to ensure that you have a body like that that can be very instrumental in dealing with conflicts wherever they are. For example, whether you have heard, many of you, I believe, if you look through the annals of history, you will have heard about conflicts, whether it is in Korea, the Korean Peninsula, whether it be in Sri Lanka, it's in the Middle East. As a matter of fact, the Palestinian crisis, let us look at that as one of the most, it perhaps is one of the longest of the conflicts since 1948. And under Resolution 242, I think it was, yes, that was taken to have this sort of, separation of the Palestinian from the Israeli, a creation of the Israeli state and so on. And that is still today one of the major issues. But nonetheless, I'm just using that to give you an idea of the involvement of the United Nations and the United Nations Council and so on, Security Council, with respect to conflict issues. You've had more recently in time, after the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe, and the fall of the Soviet Union, or the implosion as they refer to it from time to time with glasnost and perestroika, you would have had the crisis in the former Yugoslavian states. The Yugoslavian Federation fell apart after that, and you had the Kosovo wars and so on. And the United Nations in the Security Council, having that mandate, has been very critical and instrumental in dealing with that. You go to the situation in Rwanda, of course, and I do not know if you recall that. Rwanda as well, a very serious humanitarian crisis again and war in the African central states there. And again, a very important role there because of the magnitude of the problem, as one may recall. But to go back a bit to the principle of geographical representation, having said all of that, to go back to the principle of geographical representation is a way to ensure a somewhat democratic process as well. I mean, you have over 90 countries that are represented in this body, and the question or the issue of peace and security is, of course, of concern to all nations across the world. So there ought to be a way as well to have the voices of those other countries heard. And so that within that system of geographical representation, there is a rotational sort of mechanism or modality which allows, a sort of spread, representational spread, so that you have, out of the 10 members, you have every year 5 of those members, a rotation of 5 of those members, so that they can, be sort of reconstituted with another 5 coming on. But they would have a 2-year term and so on. And in that way, you have a number of countries from the developing world becoming part of that mechanism over the course of time and being able to have a voice at that very important, I would say, structure of the international system. Now, it is important to recognize that although the UN Security Council has, and Brother John referred to it earlier, a very important feature of the institution's makeup is the fact that the decisions of that body, as you said, is binding, which is sort of counter to the other things, the other aspects of international law that you would find, because to a large extent the body of international law, as far as the United Nations is concerned, does not allow for any sort of mandatory and decision outside of that body, and for good reasons, because obviously it does not facilitate the whole principle of sovereign independence and these things, because you would imagine that if you were to have these binding decisions, then what does it mean for you to take a binding decision from an international body and to bring it to a domestic jurisdictional framework, and to more or less have to rubber stamp that when your political sovereignty would be, of course, affected by that.
And in any case, the United Nations itself as a body has enshrined the non-intervention.
That's correct.
Policy.
That's correct. That's correct. Exactly. So it runs counter to that very principle. But the principle has been implanted and embedded there for that particular reason, so that once there's recognition of that political sovereignty and the independence of states, then it cannot necessarily be a sort of cat before the horse or reverse situation whereby you have that sort of being imposed on domestic, in domestic jurisdictions, because it will subvert the will of the people, basically. If you see the whole concept of constitutional democracy and the setup of any constitutional democracy for that reason, so that it was very important to have these two different systems and to recognize the limitations, so to speak, in that system with respect to certain matters. But where international, where conflict of a particular maybe magnitude and so on would concern, it is absolutely important that the United Nations can have in the Security Council some way of addressing that. And again, if you look at it, even though the decisions are binding, nonetheless, I think what is also important to note here is that the way that you go about enforcing has to do with how member states would use their resources to assist with the enforcement of any of those decisions. And it has to come not as a mandate per se from the United Nations, but the voluntary sort of involvement of putting resources to the disposal of the institution to be able to address those issues.
I want to bring in Philbert here, still on the function, but Philbert also addressed the issue where, although the United Nations has a non-interventionist policy in the affairs of its member countries, there are times when the Security Council would take decisions basically sanctioning the intervention in a state. But fundamentally, that intervention is not supposed to be taking sides with the warring factions. Let us say that is what exists, but more so to restore peace and some level of security. So
that is why that is why they have in certain conflict zones they have peacekeepers. Yeah. I think they refer to them as blue caps.
Yeah. Take
Syria. I think there were also some in Haiti not too long ago.
That's correct.
Right, and perhaps also under consideration might be Venezuela. And you made a point a while ago about the different conflict zones around the place. And let us not forget nearby, because not too long ago, there were certain resolutions before the Security Council with respect to Venezuela. And what I found interesting is that as one resolution comes forward, it is vetoed by the United States and promoted by Russia. And then there's another resolution that is vetoed by Russia and pushed by the United States. That is to tell us that, let us not forget that the ideological conflicts between the permanent members could also affect some of the decisions made by the Council. And it would be interesting to see how a small country like St. Vincent be a part of that discussion when the time comes.
And still within the context of functions, what are some of the issues are likely to dominate the discussions in the Security Council, given the state of our world politics? Not necessarily involving conflict between two countries, but going beyond that, other issues that you think would be in the limelight, so to speak, where St. Vincent and the Grenadines would have to obviously play a role.
Listening to our own Prime Minister and also the Minister of Economic Development, Camilo Gonzalez, he was on a program last week in which he highlighted some of the critical issues that they would like to see addressed. And one that is not necessarily of high priority in the Security Council at the moment is that of the impact of climate change. St. Vincent, I understand, is going to lobby to make climate change a security issue and therefore come under the purview of the United Nations Security Council, along with the traditional conflict zones that we have, ever since we were kids, we are hearing of some of these conflicts around the world. So that is what I expect to see new happening. How can St. Vincent and the Grenadines, along with the other small island development states, get the permanent 5 and the other members of the UN to take climate change and its potential impact on these territories, see it as not just as a social economic issue, but an issue of security of the highest order.
Well, if I may just add to that, Pijan, the ascension of St. Vincent and the Grenadines as a small microstate to that body is significant. And it is significant because in the lexicon of international law, international relations, international politics and geopolitics, small island developing state is a concept. It is beyond a concept. It is a reality for many states that face a certain degree of vulnerability. Vulnerabilities in economic and, of course, sometimes even a geographical and other senses. But from the point of view that they're small, vulnerable, and they are vulnerable to certain shocks, if you may, externally, from external shocks, economic, as well as, the fact that they may be perceived as of lesser, power in some respects, makes it difficult for them. As regard trade as well, let's take trade as a factor, be very vulnerable to the issues of the regulation of trade under the WTO and the ability to trade as other major, countries and so on. But largely from the point of view of smallness of size and economies of scale, and also the vulnerabilities that come with, natural disasters, climate, that affect these countries in the region, or maybe some, or even in parts of Asia. It is important to have that sort of subject matter or issue on the agenda of the international body at that particular level, because the debate has been ongoing for a long time. And the debate has been ongoing for a number of reasons. Okay, how is climate change in terms of a framework or a sort of thrust among nations put forward? so that there could be some resolution to identify what are the issues. How do you arrive at the identification of those issues? What sort of resources you put in place to mitigate disasters and to assist those countries that are vulnerable? And also from the point of view to have a definition of what is small, vulnerable states, because when the Bretton Woods institutions were set up in 1944, they were not set up with these types of states in mind. These type of states emerge only after, especially after the decolonization, the collapse of, the colonial system and decolonization. And even the very principle of sovereign independence became even more important and meaningful to the UN system after decolonization. So with the emergence of those of small microstates, you would have to write into the system a new language to define and determine how those countries should be treated with respect to certain issues. So it is important for St. Vincent to be at the forefront of that, drive to have the United Nations adopt, policies or adopt positions that would help to safeguard these countries in terms of the challenges that they face.
Yes, wonderful. But we are due a break now. But when we come back, just before we start looking at the significance and the benefits to St. Vincent and the Grenadines by being there are two other issues relating to the functions of the UN that we did not touch. And I want to relate those to our own involvement. I'm speaking there about reform. Some countries, including ours, have argued about reform to the system, and the Security Council itself is the one that has to sanction any change to the charter as such. So we'll take the break now, and we'll be back. So don't move your dial. Welcome back. Before we took the break, we were mentioning that there are two other important functions of the Security Council that we did not really discuss in any detail. I identify one before I need to add the other. That is, the Security Council is also the organ that is charged with the responsibility of recommending or sanctioning the entrance of new members to the United Nations. And we know there are a number of hotspots around the world where there are people who are campaigning for independence. You look at Catalonia in Spain.
Well, what about the Merengue people in they call it Myanmar, sometimes.
Right. Yes.
And all Burma and so on.
Right.
Where you have ethnic groups who may have a certain. I mean, you go back to Russia and Chechnya. There are these ethnic issues that can loom very largely with respect to political, strife, and therefore it can create fractions, or it can create what you call breakups into some of these states and their borders, and it becomes an issue as regard conflict and, of course, security. So, again, the role of the UN Security Council is very important in that regard. So that, for example, it's not a matter of saying, well, yeah, we will take Kosovo and make it a member, when there are certain political implications, and those have to be taken into consideration. So these are some of the issues.
And similarly, quickly, the whole issue of reform. Some persons complain that why in the 21st century we still have nations with veto powers, why again there are certain actions that you will have at the United Nations, not actions, but discussion, resolution, but implementation lag far behind. So these are all issues. Yeah?
Well, when you talk about the institution as a creature of the post-Second World War, there are certain realities that would have been predominant at that point in time, so that the way to preserve the peace or maintain it would have been as a matter of how the peace was achieved, if you understand me. Yes. But following from there, the membership, as I said before, has swollen, exponentially to the point of 190 something, members, and with varying and different interests, and finding themselves to be in different groups. I mean, one of the things that, for example, was mentioned, or there is, some degree of activity to have the number of the permanent memberships change, is to include Japan. Many years, there has been this, I don't know if you would say agitation, but there has been concerted effort to change the composition of the permanent five,
because I was going
Germany and so on. But again, that has not materialized up to this point in time, and perhaps a good reason, but it is very debatable from the point of view that one has to look at what this could mean in terms of real implications for because these are countries that were part of the very system that this system came out of. They were part of the problem.
Well, I was going to say
that the system came out of, or that it emerged from.
Exactly, they emerged from the league. But let us not forget, although we say they are founding members, the truth is these were the victors who came out of World War II.
Peace.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And as such, as time elapses, obviously those who were defeated, Germany, the Japan, they are going to start looking at, but we have basically solved our time, and why not?
Well, I think there are other political and economic considerations as well. I mean, Germany, as you see it today, has emerged to be a superpower within Europe itself, within the European Union, and is the largest economic player in that group. Significant political influence. Japan similarly has emerged to be an economic superpower itself. And so, in addition, they have become pretty much part of the system of the global governance, to the point where the Japanese Prime Minister is sitting down today to try to broker the peace between the United States and Iran, and to ensure that there's some avoidance of any conflict, or there's a heightening, or any heightening of that conflict in situation there. So Germany at this point in time, is at the forefront of leadership in the European Union and the NATO alliance and so on. And, so that the history of Germany being an aggressor nation as well as Japan has actually, subsided. And as a result of which now, you have this agitation which says, well, why not? They are economic powers. They have transformed themselves. They are no longer belligerent. They are now peaceful countries. So they should be allowed to come into the fray as well.
Just before you come in, Pijan, let me remind viewers, listeners, you can join the discussion live by using our hotline 458-0088. You can call that number, or you can WhatsApp via number 530-8962. So we will be accepting your calls, and we will be taking your WhatsApp calls. Pijan, yes. So it was important for us to give that context so that one person will understand why the United Nations Security Council, how it evolved, what are its functions, what are some of the things in practical terms that they would be expected to deal with. Hence, a small territory like St. Vincent and the Grenadines, being on that important organ, has itself now to be well prepared to participate in the level of discussion and decision making. Now that we have made that clear, let us look at what are some of the likely benefits to be derived by St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Before you go to that, I want to make a point about about reform.
Yes.
We run the risk globally of the current model being anachronistic, in the sense that the world that they were responding to at that time no longer exists, and therefore the model ought to change. And that's the first point. The second point I want to make with respect to a challenge with respect to any kind of reform is the certain currents we see taking place in international politics. Isolationism, the nationalism as promoted by the Trumps of the world, where, for example, Donald Trump figure America is America first and perhaps America only. So we have to take into consideration those currents and how can a small island such as St. Vincent and the Grenadines, being on the Security Council, impact the discussion with respect to reform. I know that I've heard our leaders say, I think it's the Prime Minister, that they are part of a group of 169, and one of their primary objectives is to get some kind of reform to the UN Security Council. As to how St. Vincent could benefit, apart from the profile, the high profile, the fact that we are known, clearly we are known in 193 capitals, put it that way. The 193 countries who give us consideration, then the 185 who actually voted for us to be on the Security Council. The name of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, it's there, and perhaps people like to see the place. It may have implications for our tourism product. And also, I came across a study done by two, I think, were African students associated with Harvard. They conducted this survey, this study, to look at the costs associated with UN Security Council membership. I think it was done between 2004 and 2006. And they found that aid for non-permanent members, monetary aid, went up. They quoted a figure as much as by 56%. That is to say, there's a tendency for the permanent members, for example, the United States, United Kingdom, to pay close attention to the non-permanent members, particularly in the direction they wish to vote, etc., and offer them certain assistance. I don't think they want to use the word bribe, but it could be seen as bribe involved. So, but it is a serious study, and they were suggesting that non-permanent members can benefit financially just by being in association with the permanent members.
Just quickly before you continue with the benefits, we have someone from on WhatsApp. They want to find out, yes, what are the benefits which you're hearing, but also what are the disadvantages. Yes, so you could address that in the discussion on benefits.
I can't see any disadvantage of being a member. Membership has its privileges, to use a quote from some other organization. Membership has its privileges. Go ahead. Slip me there.
I want to discuss this in a very contextual way. I don't want it to be in a vacuum, and I don't want it to be a case of the speculation or speculative. Look, every state, once it is a sovereign state, it must develop, based on its national interests, certain statecraft, meaning its diplomacy. Now, its diplomacy is driven by its domestic interests, fundamentally. As a result of having those domestic interests, and we have to define what those are, whether they are to develop tourism, whether it is to develop trade, whether it is to develop further political, cultural, and other relations with friendly countries, so that we can benefit by way of development, development cooperation diplomacy, or whether it is through our efforts to exist in a multilateral setting, as opposed to a bilateral relation, to see from there how we can use those opportunities to further promote the national agenda issues. So the statecraft speaks to that by way of engaging in relationships on a bilateral or a multilateral level, meaning bilateral between two countries or multilateral just like we have in the United Nations, because the United Nations is a world body of 190 something, almost 200 countries, meaning that you already have, by virtue of being a member, access to those countries. Okay? So that is beneficial, it is significant, but important is your foreign policy, your statecraft, to sort of formulate that in a sense that it would be responsive to your domestic needs, and at the same time you can therefore engage these countries externally, knowing what your domestic interests are, and to be able to promote them by way of the articulation of your foreign policy. And you do that through two portals mainly, either it be a bilateral relation. I mean, we have had relations bilaterally very strong with countries like China and Taiwan, the Republic of Cuba, and of course the Republic of Venezuela, and so on, and to name, a few. But as far as many of our Vincentian brothers and sisters can remember, whether it be from 1983 with Taiwan coming down, Japan, and let me be very concrete here. Let me show you the importance of foreign policy, because I practiced foreign policy at a time when still a lot of people in this country did not take foreign policy as a serious issue. I remember when I came back from Belgium, I started off a program with Chester Connors and Jerry George and so on to articulate the views and to bring the information about international affairs, international politics to the Vincentian public, so that we could educate people as to what is happening and why it is important to understand how it impacts us. But the point I'm making here is this, that it is important to understand, first of all, the national interest, and therefore articulate it in a way in which you will engage the international community through institutions like the United Nations, etc., to be able to, promote those very interests, and to find, of course, the resources sometimes that we so need to aid our, national development. And we can go to things like, whether it is the Japanese grassroots project, the fisheries project, and you can come to the Taiwanese, in terms of the bilaterals I'm speaking to, you can come to the scholarships, as a way of having cultural exchanges between people, educational cooperation, and so on. At the multilateral level, it is another aspect, or it's another weaponry within your arsenal, your diplomatic arsenal. And I am weaponizing the language, because we are talking about peace, but at the same time, what it means is the tool that we have that is within our diplomatic arsenal are the ability to work with countries on a bilateral level, as well as to work with them on a multilateral level. So the Security Council membership offers us that opportunity to work with countries at a multilateral level, and at the highest level, as a matter of fact, because when you look at the Security Council, you're talking about one of the major, if not the major institution within the world body, and that body, that organ itself, discusses very important and critical, issues. The idea here for St. Vincent is a small, as I said earlier, micro vulnerable state, is to be able to sort of bring that language and articulate those interests, on behalf of St. Vincent, and of course other countries which share similar views and values to that fora, so that St. Vincent can provide that sort of leadership, so to speak, because that is very fundamental. It's a leadership issue. You're looking at your national interest, because boy, we are surrounded by seawater. We see climate change, and we see the impact of it, and we understand it. But we can't simply think that by us going out and articulating it on our own, that we can change the agenda and we can change the language and get the issues. We have to work with others, and it is an opportunity now for us to be able to do so very constructively and effectively, because we are now a part of that. I think there's another very important point, and the point was made by John, that the profile of St. Vincent is enhanced. It's this is a coming of age for a small country like ours, and it is also a way for us to further develop our diplomatic skills and initiative, because we are now going to be faced with a plethora of various issues, and we're going to, as a result of, we have to find the expertise, we have to improve that, we have to find it where we might be able to get assistance, we have to interact with other countries who may want us to assist them with their own issues, and to be able to take that on board and to see how we can build, consensus in the process. So these are very, very important issues. But I want to say this: it must never be a matter of saying, well, it is expensive and therefore we tend to have more on what is the cost.
Well, we are coming to that issue.
I'm just saying
that issue the next segment. So all it for.
Right. But
yes,
the benefits are when we are able to work, as I said, with other countries on a multilateral setting, to promote our interests, but at the same time work with other countries to do it, and vice versa, because obviously it would be a case where, a number of countries around the world would be able to reach out to St. Vincent, with the expectation that they can find a true ally. So also, we would be building new relationships in addition to the traditional ones which we would have had, and the ones which we are now, enjoying, etc. So it's a way for our foreign policy to become more versed, to become more advanced, and to become more mature. And obviously, we would have to find the expertise and the resources to now, perform at that level, because it requires us to be leaders in the true sense, especially among countries where they share similar values, they have similar challenges, as a matter of fact, and so they would be able to rally those. I think if you look at the Prime Minister of Antigua and his congratulatory message, that was not because Antigua just simply says, "Oh well, we love this for St. Vincent and it's good for the Caribbean." That is because Antigua has had a certain level of exposure and experience in the United Nations system. You had a fellow like Ambassador
Sanders.
Not Sanders. It was I think it was Hunt. Earlier, he dealt a lot with climate change and small island state issues, and to the point where it was very vocal and so on these issues, and got a lot of respect for it in the United Nations. So they understand. And I say this because when you begin to not just simply participate in the discussions by way of attendance, but that you sit at the table and you are able to influence the decision-making process, I think that is in itself effective participation. And I think that's absolute must for small states like ours, and also for countries like those in the OECS and CARICOM, because quite often what happens in those diplomatic settings is that your vote is always something to be counted on, but in terms of being able to articulate and to influence the process, that is another aspect of diplomacy that we have to practice.
But I would also like to comment on the intangible, the psychological benefits that we don't talk much about. As a country,
and it's
the notion of confidence, and even at the individual level, believing that despite my limitations, I can use my imagination and anything is possible. And I think to a certain extent, St. Vincent and Grenadines have demonstrated that. As a small country, 110,000 people, on the global stage, nothing is beyond us. And at certain fora, and certainly at United Nations, our sovereignty is equal to any other sovereignty.
That's right.
In the room. And we're not just simply saying it, but by being on the council, we are demonstrating it.
Yeah. I put it in practical terms. You travel all over the world. You spend your educational, your period, tertiary education period in Russia. Okay, Pijan, you have traveled all over the world. Myself. St. Vincent and the Grenadines is a little dot. Sometimes it's not even a recognizable dot. I remember saying
and you're quite right. I mean, look,
Brussels.
You know,
I remember when you were ACP,
I was in
EC
Brussels,
Youth
if you
Forum,
remember.
and I was shocked that people could not identify St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I was told basically they didn't know what I was speaking about.
But you're absolutely correct. And look, I mean, in all my experiences, whether it was in Moscow, you know, Belgium or London, because, you know,
We have our first caller. Good night, caller. Welcome to the Viewpoint.
Yeah, good night to the panel.
Yes.
good night.
I wasn't from the beginning, so I don't, maybe you will have to ask, maybe somebody had already asked it. But I'm going to ask this question. For a small state, island like St. Vincent and the Grenadines, being a member of the United Nations Security Council, are there any benefit can derive that is profitable to St. Vincent and the Grenadines? What is the purpose for St. Vincent and Grenadines being a member of the United Nations Security Council? I would like you all to explain that to me. I don't know if anybody asked it before, but as I just joined in, that's why I asked.
I caller, thank you very much. You can listen off air, but that has been our discussion, I mean, from the commencement of the second segment. Went through a number of issues that we could put as beneficial to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. In fact, the last point that was made, where both the panelists were talking about the exposure, basically, that the position allows would be great for our people's psyche, as mentioned by Pijan, confidence level, and as Jack was saying, by being at the table, you're not just going, you're not just turning up to say you're present, but you are at the table where you have an opportunity to help to influence the decisions.
But let me just add something to that. And, you know, we were talking earlier about the fact that the profile has now and will be enhanced as a result of this new role. And you said that, you know, you travel around the world and you go to places and you try to make a representation of your nationality as a Vincentian. And by most indications, people are not aware of, you know, where it is and so on and what it represents. Now, this is an opportunity to, of course, put St. Vincent, as it were, on the map. Very firmly, and I would say this, look, we have to look at this in the context of what is happening in terms of our national development. We have just gone to the point of investing in a major piece of infrastructure in this country to boost our tourism. Now, to boost our tourism, we need the rest of the world. Whether it is true bilateral relations that we will establish in the course of our presentation of various systems in the international community, or whether it is at the multilateral level where we will interact with a number of countries, form various relationships, stretch existing ones, and of course be able to use those relations to further benefit and promote our tourism, our trade, our development economically and overall in a macro sense.
Okay, we are the point for our next break, but somebody is going forward our Facebook page. I'm going to advise persons to call us via WhatsApp. The number is 530-8962. And we now take the break. When we come back, we look at the whole issue of cost and deal with that issue once and for all. Welcome back, and this is our final segment. Of course, we are discussing the whole issue of St. Vincent and the Grenadines elections to a non-permanent position on the United Nations Security Council. So far, we have been looking at the benefits. We have looked at the UN and the United Nations Security Council in detail. In this segment, we want to address the whole issue of cost, because you would recognize that there are a number of persons, for some reason or the other, have been placing this within the context of a cost-benefit scenario, and as such, these are issues we have to address. So we want in this segment to look at what are the likely costs to the country of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, if there are any. Yes, so let us put costs into context. Of course, there will be costs, but let us put that cost into context. And you had started, Jack, when I asked you to save that point.
Well, I mean, the point I was about to make, Curtis, is this. Look, I'm not sure what the issue of cost is here in terms of any sort of idea of what it may mean additionally to the subscription that you're already paying, because there is, as far as I'm aware, once you're a member, there are certain subscription or what you call payments that you would have to make in keeping with your membership. Yes. Outside of that, I am not aware as to what cost, if any, costing there is. I can only say from my own experience is when you are promoting a particular, what you call it, program, or you want to achieve a certain output by way of maybe a membership to a particular committee or something of that nature, that there is a cost that may come with the negotiation and, of course, trying to build, the necessary alliances to be able to promote that idea.
Just take a point. Viewers, listeners, you can send a WhatsApp message. We will not be able to take that call, so please send a WhatsApp message. The WhatsApp number is 530-8962, but we have a caller. Good night, caller. Good night, caller.
Good night, Mr. Curtis, King P. John, and the brilliant, lawyer Jack and so on. You're three of our wisest men in this country right now, and I'm happy that this discussion is going on. I'm wondering if it's not too late, though. I have had to answer one of the questions concerning this whole thing about our assumption of a seat on the Security Council. I get the impression that a lot of work in terms of educating our people, they're not going to this. I wonder if this was a well-planned out strategy not to educate, inform our people about our intention to get a seat on this non-permanent council, the United Nations. Too much people are asking me questions that don't see a guy like me. So I'm happy that if you three guys can simplify this whole thing. And one thing I'm happy about, our country is under the microscope now, and all the negativity, all the cheap political utterances that are made by our politicians, especially some of them in office, I hope they will lift their game and make this country a better country, and we'll get the respect that we deserve. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, caller. Okay, the caller mentioned that he wondered if it's something that was just emergent, but Pigeon and Jack, I was told that in fact, we were told by the government long time ago that the country was going to seek a position and as a non-permanent member of the National Security Council from as early back as about 2010.
Yes. Curtis, not only that, I would like to point listeners and viewers to the estimates, which is a public document.
Okay.
And the estimates, I have a copy of the latest one available to me, 2018, fiscal year 2018. Foreign missions and the amount estimated to be spent in foreign missions, which will include the permanent mission at the UN. Mm-hmm. $9,430,000 and $430,020. That is for 2018. Projected for 2019 is a similar figure. Projected for 2020 is 9.5 million, thereabout. And this is for foreign missions, including all the consulates, in the various capitals and other associated services. And there's no noticeable spike in the budgetary allocation over the years and any projections being made. The point they're making, it would appear as if the cost associated with the UN Security Council membership is simply part of the regular budgetary exercise and budgetary allocations. And the government has not hid its intention, nor
Always been seeing it.
has it in any way hidden the cost of its foreign missions abroad. If I look through this further, I will be able to tell you exactly how much has been allocated for the permanent mission at the United Nations.
One thing,
which is significantly less than $1 million. Yes.
But the fact is, though, you're talking about a period where you're campaigning to be on.
Right.
Now that you're on, there must be.
No, that I'm saying there's some project. I just say they're projected costs here too. I have for 2080, but there are projections for 2019 and 2020.
Right, but you were saying that there's no real spike in the estimate.
Exactly. And the idea that the figures not known or somehow cannot be known, I think it's false. Here we have the estimates, these are public documents. Maybe
I think we have to first of all determine what aspect of the costing we are talking about.
Exactly.
You know, I think that's the first thing, because when I
okay, stick up in there. We have a next caller. Let us take the call. Just save that one. Good night, caller.
Hello, good night.
Yes, good night.
Yes, man. Yes, good night.
Yes, good
night.
Hello?
Yes, good night. I'm hearing you. Go ahead.
Mr. King, good night, and the other panelists and the vice.
Yes.
Alright, we will take a non-commit and program with commitment. And basically, I really understand if I hear why is the real benefit that come out of this whole situation, right? But still, it's when the program, and I don't know if you have time to explain exactly, it's precisely why is the main benefit.
We lost that caller, but the same issue of the benefit. I don't know how.
well, I mean, as I said, the benefit. Look, we have had a tradition of not fully appreciating diplomacy as being able to bring to St. Vincent and the Grenadines benefits. And that is because, to a large extent, early in terms of our development as a sovereign state, we emphasize a narrow view of diplomacy to mean the protocol aspect of diplomacy, i.e., people understood diplomacy to mean a person come to St. Vincent and we had to go out and sort of entertain them.
Okay, let us take this next call. Good night, caller. Welcome to the Viewpoint.
Hey, good night, good night.
Good night.
I'm a farmer student, Mr. Pigeon. Good night, Mr. Pigeon.
Good night, sir.
Yeah.
Good night.
Good night.
Before I continue, I'm gonna let you guys know I'm one of the names that was on the list with Lizette in them. My name is Matt Walker. And I'm gonna let you guys know the reason my name was on the list. Number 6, y'all say y'all gonna tell the UN. Y'all told the UN that y'all gonna increase security for children and women. I'm biased. I have a daughter. And when I see people rape kids and get a suspended sentence, that's why my name was on that list. Because we need to take care of our children in St. Vincent first before we push to UN. Now, fast forward. Congratulations on the seat, because United Nations making decision that affects us. So we have to be part of that decision making. So, in the past, my name was on the list, and I'm glad St. Vincent is on it right now. My biasness make me put my name on there. Now, as my next question is, as far as climate change, we move forward as far as the environmental impact in St. Vincent to lead by example, because year after year when I go home, I notice the coral reef, in particularly Bambaro and Leyu Beach, it's depleted based off the runoff from houses. I know we have a grey water system that planning have implemented, but I really ain't seeing nothing doing. So what are we planning on doing to basically lead by example? Because St. Vincent is so small that problems that affect the world is magnified. So what's our intentions with that?
All right. So you would listen off, eh? So let us respond.
Yeah.
Yes. Thanks for your call. Yes.
I'm glad that he claimed he's no longer part of that quote-unquote list.
Yes.
And that really make him my student in truth.
So before you address
but then again, at the same time, on a more serious note, how can we allow domestic issues to impact the decisions we make with respect to foreign policy? Yes, we may have the domestic concerns, but that in no way should prevent us from having a place at the table when it comes to foreign policy. If we are to use that measure, several of the territories who are on the UN Security Council, when you look at their domestic problems, they should be totally disqualified, to use their logic. So, yes, if you have differences at the domestic level, party, political differences, that should not debar you from supporting your country and taking a bold move on the international scene.
You know, I think that the callers would have had some legitimate concerns, in the sense that what they were, in my mind, to my mind, asking is how transparent is our, foreign policy, how inclusive it is, how educational it is. I can say this, that I know, for example, and maybe there is need for more discussion and education, and I think that's what we have to, because, as I said, when I came back from Belgium, I started this program to, disseminate, educate, and inform people about international affairs. And it was something that people felt, well, maybe that's a luxurious issue. You don't have to deal with that. But I just wanted to remind that even to this point, we are still not where we should be in terms of the education that we ought to have with respect to foreign policy. And I think that's what people are speaking to. However, I can say at the same time that the Foreign Ministry, one of the things that we I have tried to, I have been part of, and what I see is pretty much a feature of the Foreign Ministry right now, is the fact that it has been producing a sort of, bulletin to disseminate information to the public. I think that just needs to be expanded so that the public could become more aware of what is happening from a foreign policy perspective. And from
and
an
they have to take the opportunity.
Yeah.
Like, so what this one,
like this, for example, should be a way for them to put into that bulletin information, disseminate it, have a PR sort of, use it as a PR tool, so that the public could be more sensitized and informed about these different things that are happening. Look, we're talking about diplomacy here, and we cannot extricate diplomacy as a bit of wine and dine and, spend money overseas, and you can't quantify it or you can't justify it. When we see, let me say this contextually. When we look at building roads under the European Development Fund, when we talk about building schools under the European Development Fund, when we talk about building hospitals under the European Development Fund, when we talk about building bridges through the assistance of the Ecuadorians, when we talk about scholarships through to Taiwan or to Cuba or to Venezuela, we have to look at these as the direct result and consequence of our diplomatic craft. And people have to understand in this country that that is what it means. That's what diplomacy means at the multilateral and the bilateral level. The multilateral level means working with other countries to promote your national interests. And at the bilateral, that you can foster, strengthen, and improve relationships existing or otherwise, so that you can promote your development agenda by way of cultural relationship, educational relationship, cooperation in the field of science and agriculture and so on. So these are the very tangibles. And I do not see
the training of national.
Yeah, and the training of national, of course. And that's why I said the scholarships. Because the human, what you call per capita development is critical. And how do we do these things? We can't do these things by ourselves with the resources that we have. We have to have the possibility of engaging with other countries who can assist us in the various ways that we may need those assistance. And it is through diplomatic channels that we do that. That is the portal. So I want to bring that to this forum so that there is a clear understanding of the tangibility and the tangible aspect in terms of the benefit. Because quite often we hear, oh, you spend $9 million. And I know when we went to Belgium to set up a mission in Belgium to deal with the what you call Lomé protocol, sugar and bananas and so on. The idea was because you had no representation in that capital. As a result of that, you realize you have to have representation in Geneva because you had trade talks going on in Geneva, which would affect Howe St. Vincent trade on the international market. Whether it would have been able to continue to, of course, benefit from the preferential access to European markets and the world market. And so you have to have a presence. And so that the justification for setting up a mission in Belgium was also so that we can have a voice in that capital where the Lomé Convention, now the Cotonou, was concerned, as well as the WTO meetings in Geneva and the Geneva, trade laws. But interestingly, when you do that, maybe the old notion of diplomacy being go overseas and spend money, but we can't see the tangibility of it because the only reason our people are not seeing the tangibility is because governments over the years, to some extent, have failed to sufficiently inform and educate people of these types of benefits because they're benefiting. I just call them out for you: the hospital, the school, the road, the bridge.
People look at benefit as only cash.
That's right, but we're not educating our people enough to understand these things.
I just want to make a quick comment on the issue of cost. Do we know how many international organizations St. Vincent belong to?
Several.
And how come we have never ever questioned the cost of being associated with these?
Look, I don't think that should be. I don't think that should be the articulation at this point in time. I think it should be a case where we can inform our people that look, we are opening ourselves for business in this country. That's the first thing we have to appreciate. We are opening ourselves for business with the international community, with the world, and we have to prepare. But it means, just like every business, if you are going to open yourself for business, you have to invest. You must have an investment of capital, of human, you understand, per capita, and so on. So if we are serious about moving this country forward, and this is why, for example, places like Jamaica and Antigua are ahead, because they were able to forge ahead with their foreign policy. Barbados, when I went to Belgium and I look at the foreign policy of Barbados and Trinidad and Jamaica, it was a clear indication of where we need to be. We need to be more advanced. We need to develop our foreign policy, our statecraft, to the point.
We have an next call, and I have several messages that I need to at least read some. But let's take the caller. Good night, caller.
Yeah, good night again. Now, to me, the word Security Council, does that really mean peace and stability to country? And secondly, if it's that way, the crisis that's taking place in Venezuela right now, can the Security Council play a role in that? Thank you very much.
All right, okay, good. Yes, just before you respond, let me just read it. Boy, I try to skip some. This one, persistence. Let me go. The people of this nation know that the United Nations, seeking one world order? The people of this nation know that the UN, it's all about getting the one world order. Why are the panelists not answering the question? I don't know what else you want. They say one with benefits. We've been doing that all the time. Okay, we have a next caller. Good night, caller. Okay, we have lost that caller. Sorry, caller, you can call back. But yes, we've been answering the benefit one all the time. Right? Yes, we have a next caller. Good night, caller.
Hey, it's me, Max, calling back again. You guys provoking a lot of questions in my head. Now, as far as the cost is always going to be worth it, like you said. So, it's an investment for St. Vincent. And the return on the investment might not be seen now, it might see 5 years or 10 years down the road.
Yes. Absolutely.
But my next question now is, what Vincentians at home have to invest as far as mindset is concerned? Because far too long ago, we see the government invest money, but the mindset of the people. For example, we invest in tourism, but customer service isn't being looked at seriously. I live in Washington, D.C., FYI. So we have to all get on board to move St. Vincent forward. NDP, ULP, Green Party, white, black, up, down, cold, whatever the case may be. So we have, and like you said, we need education, and we have to educate ourselves as far as getting on the same page and seeing the bigger picture of the seed that we hold. Like I said, my name was on the list, but now I have to look for the future. What I can do in Washington, D.C. to make this United Nations seed a success for all Vincentians. The one them win bad, that's what I'm talking about, you know? So we have to look at that from that angle. So that's the next question I have for you. What Vincentians at home need to do to make sure that these pointers that was presented to the United Nations goals are met? Thank you.
Okay, panelists, good question.
Look, I can't agree more with that last caller that this is a national, all hands on deck. Yeah. Just to put it simply, this is very important for us. As I said, we are opening ourselves to doing business with the rest of the world. As I said earlier in my intervention, we have built a new piece of infrastructure.
Okay, let us take the call. We have a next caller. Good night, caller.
Yes, I just want to say thank you, Mr. Jackson, for your fulsome explanation a while ago. Remember, accountability, transparency are bad words in this country. And this is an institution that is going to export us, how we sell ourselves, and the government is an initiative that they have to take to educate our people, not tell us it's a prestigious position, like the Prime Minister said. Prestigious and prestige, those are just words. You want some meaning behind all of this. Thank you.
All right. Yes, so continue.
So, opening ourselves to business means that we have to invest in capital. We have to invest the capital in our foreign service diplomats. The foreign ministry definitely, if we are spending $9 million, I want the Vincentian people to understand it might be a drop in the bucket. Because, look, we have to develop representational appearance in principal capitals. If you have a capital in, let us say, if you have representation or you want to promote your representation in Taipei, you have to have a physical presence there. But you have to have trained personnel and people who could be, whether it is economists, you understand me, who can understand the financials of the market and do the analysis, see what kind of benefits we can derive from that country, and use the very same foreign representation in Taipei to be, of course, representational in Southeast Asia, whether it is in Singapore, so we can forge better relations with Singapore, learn from the experiences, and bring that to bear by way of the best practices that they may have. It's one of the richest countries in the world. We can go down to South Korea. We can speak to them. We have the relation already, but we need to deepen those relationships. You can go across the Seychelles. They do well in tourism. A small economy like ours, island state, archipelagic, they have an experience in tourism. Maybe you have investors, but there are enormous opportunities out there for us. It all depends on how we deal with it. We cannot look at this as, and let me say this, the business of diplomacy is sophisticated and it is expensive. It can be. But as the caller said a while ago, we must not look at it in the short term. We must look at it in the sense of the long term as well as the global picture, the bigger picture, and what it means for us as a people in terms of moving this country forward. Without that, I think we would be forever questioning ourselves and being perhaps satisfied with where we are. We must be bold and sufficiently, like every other person, you take a businessman. When you do business, you have to take risk. And we are not saying risk just you know, without any sense of calculation, but a risk which would allow you to understand and quantify the benefits to be derived from what you're doing. And I should say that what is important in the equation as well is to inform, is to have an informative sort of process as well, where the people of this country could be informed. Because I think you would suffer the consequence of not informing people.
That is where I would like to come in fact, in direct answer to Max's question, who called a while ago. In this age, it is easy to follow what is going on. You can follow the UN Council meetings. Their minutes are posted on their website. You can see how countries or positions are taken in the debates.
Well, that may be so. You know, I have to intervene. Let
me just finish the 4 quick points about what we can do. So you have to.
Yes, we are coming close so quickly.
Be informed. Let your voices be heard locally so we can impact the positions that our government will take in these fora.
Quickly?
It's quickly to say that, yes, while they can now have the benefit of the internet and everybody can see what's happening, there is a responsibility that our, executive has with respect to the foreign policy that is crafted so that people can understand how it fits our national development agenda and so that we can get all the hands on board.
Right.
Final 5 seconds.
Well, I would like to end by congratulating our country, our government and people for being part of the United Nations Security Council. And I would encourage people to follow the discussion, follow the debates, and as I said a while ago, let your voice be heard also and impact what they do at that level.
Yeah.
By way of wrap up, I would like to say on my own, personal Julian Jack, I think this is a tremendous achievement for us as a people, and of course, congratulations for us as a people. I also have a representational capacity as well as, the Honorary Consul for the Republic of Poland to St. Vincent, and I would like to take this opportunity to also extend congratulations to the government and people of St. Vincent on, the assumption of this new position at the UN highest order. Domestically, more work for the Foreign Ministry, get your PR out there, inform the Vincentian public, and of course, with that also improve and develop further the capacity of your trained diplomats to be able to maximize the representation at that level and in the other important capitals around the country.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Jack and Mr. John. And I'd like to add my own words of congratulations to the government and people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and hope that we'll all work together to ensure that we maximize our participation in the United Nations Security Council, and at the end of the day, we all will be better for our participation. Thank you very much, viewers and listeners, and of course those persons who called, those who sent messages. We will see you in 2 Sundays from now. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your night.